Hello and welcome to Tuesdays with Morrissey. I'm your host, Adam Morrissey. Today I'm really excited to have a conversation about data, technology, and sports. And for that, I have a little surprise for my guest. Gonna put on a Moneyball Oakland Athletics hat to settle in. Huge welcome to my guest, John Sears. How are you doing today, John?
Adam, it's great to be here.
Yeah, totally, man. Well, I appreciate you making the time. You've had one of the most interesting careers of anybody I've ever met. It's really an ode to, I think Leonardo DiCaprio's dad said his only advice was live an interesting life. And you've certainly done that in the career realm. To attempt to give some background, you started your career in the software engineering group, launching streaming services HBO, then went off and worked at the Federal Reserve, then went back to school and got an advanced degree from Stanford, and took that focus to sports with during the Hinkie era of the 76ers. Somehow leveraged that experience to get into the data science and AI groups at Uber, then further in transportation, heading data science at Keep Truckin', which is now Motive, and then back to sports with the Timberwolves and the Los Angeles Dodgers. John, how do you connect the dots between these opportunities?
It's one of those things where I think it's impossible to in real time, but then when you look back, all of a sudden you can make a narrative. I think in looking back, it's like early in my career, I really just wanted to figure out what I liked doing. I didn't know that was what I was trying to do, but again, it's like in hindsight, that's basically what I was trying to figure out. And so, I was a computer science major. I thought that the only jobs you could do with computer science was go be an engineer. So got a software engineering job in New York City. And the emphasis was trying to find a job in New York City. But I tried really hard to just, jump around until I found the thing that really fit the best. And again, it's I wasn't doing that at the time. They were gut wrenching decisions to take a new job or change careers or something. But in retrospect, that's basically what was happening is okay, I really enjoyed some aspects of computer science, building algorithms, writing code, trying to solve hard computational problems. But, building internal tools at HBO wasn't the thing that was most exciting for me. And so then, I switched over to a completely new world trying to do quant finance research for the Fed during the financial crisis. And that's where I got exposed to the statistics. And I'd never taken a stats class before. I had no idea what any of this stuff was. But trying to apply it to help these amazing economists, try to understand the market better was super fascinating. Coming out of that, I realized I loved aspects of it, but I wasn't trying to do a traditional Wall Street finance kind of role, which a lot of folks in that position then went on to do. And so, I went back to school to study a lot of the same concepts more formally in operations research. And while I was there, hooked on with the 76ers part-time as a student and built models for them, worked, for Stam and such and over there, and then later by Falk. And once I graduated, joined full-time. And that was my first quote unquote data science job. But my job title was basketball operations assistant. And so that experience happened to give me a really good training though in data science because I was really the only data scientist there. I had to be able to kind of check my own work, build my own ideas, push a research agenda all on my own. I got amazing feedback from the basketball folks like Sam and such and some of the scouts who I talked to. But I had to be able to do all of the kind of technical stuff on the modeling side myself. And so then once Sam got pushed out or whatever, and I started looking for a new role, all of a sudden there was this whole new industry called data science that didn't exist when I graduated from school. So when I left my undergrad in 2009, I don't think there was a single person in America employed as a data scientist. But by 2016, all of a sudden it was a big thing, and particularly in San Francisco where I lived at that time. And so I was able to do a bunch of interviews with Uber and joined them in the middle of a crazy rocket ship ride at that time, which, we can get into some of what happened later, but at that time, at least, growth looked like a vertical line upward. And it was all hands on deck all the time, trying to use really hardcore quant models to like run the business more effectively. And that was awesome. And that has become the common thread. And it's taken me all those years to figure that out. But like right around then, I realized like, this is what I enjoy. I enjoy trying to make high leverage to strategic decisions using models, data, statistical inference, all that fun stuff that is uniquely a mishmash of like the computer science and software engineering and stats and modeling, decision analysis kind of stuff that I happen to have studied. Like, you know, over time, just kind of figured out like what felt good to do and kept adding to that portfolio.
Really helpful. And it's funny, you allude to one of Steve Jobs' most famous quotes around, you know, you can't connect the dots looking forward, but you can connect the dots looking backwards. And it's funny, I definitely can relate to that gun-wrenching feeling of trying to evaluate decisions. One time I was in college and, at our school, we'd have all sorts of speakers come in. And I had a good question once. I asked the CEO of KPMG and then proceeded to ask basically every successful person I could find. I said, hey, how you're a successful person. So assuming you're successful in this, you must have had other opportunities. So question is, how did you evaluate opportunities across your life and your career and ultimately make the right decision for you? And to be honest, I got tons of boring answers. And I got a bunch of people that were like, I never got a better opportunity, or I just kept learning, things that weren't very satisfying to a 22-year-old. Well, one time, one of my clients at PwC, I asked that question. It was like the best answer I've ever gotten. He goes, about a 60-year-old guy, worked in like an SVP of legal at one of the big healthcare companies in Dallas. And he said, if I could do it again, I would more critically evaluate opportunities. And I wouldn't look at things so long-term. I would only look at things in 2 to 3-year blocks and ask myself the question, what can I learn about myself and what can I learn about the world? And even though there are people out there that probably think you just can't keep a job, it sounds like that's what you've been doing, which is super cool. A couple of years ago, I asked you a question. I'm curious if you remember what you said, but I was like, hey, you've been successful in these different arenas. And I asked you, it turned out to be a flawed question, but I asked you, what skills do you think you had to allow you to elevate in each of these arenas? And if you don't remember what you can say, you said I can fill in the blanks for you.
The question was, what skills do I have that allowed me to kind of make those kind of switches?
Yep.
I don't remember the question. I think I remember going out to tacos with you in the Mission. Was that conversation? Or was it one of the phone calls?
It was a phone call, and you said, you might think I'm a fraud, but, when I look back, I don't think it has much to do with the skills I had as much as it is a willingness to be out of my comfort zone.
I think that's actually exactly right. Kudos to myself from a couple of years ago for saying it, because in thinking about it, a lot of those decisions were really hard. I remember talking to my dad before I took the Fed job, and it meant like a 50% pay cut, like going way backward. And he was just like, you're insane to do that. You should not do that. It's like a bad decision. And I was like, I think it's the right decision. Like, you can't think of it as like just, you can't just like straight line every salary for like the rest of your life. It's like, the experience, there's so much more to it than like my earnings over the next 2 years. And of course, that's like a privileged thing to say. Like I did a bunch of student debt, but like, because either way, was making enough to service it. And I think the short answer is it was really hard, and it was at points it felt like kind of crazy. But yeah, I think that's right.
Cool, man. And for those playing at home, just listening to you talk about connecting the dots, you caught the launch of streaming services, a financial crisis, data in sports, and data science and technology. So whatever you've done, your timing's been pretty good.
It's good to be lucky,
Yeah. Oh, it's totally good. There's a lot of things outside of our control, and timing has certainly worked so far.
Absolutely. Yeah.
We've all read or at least heard of Moneyball, and know of the role of data in sports. And, for you, having worked at the cross section of data and sports back when it was basically first starting, and then again, these past couple of years, how would you say the industry has changed relative to the outlook of the role of data?
Yeah, I guess I want to caveat it and say, like, I was early, but I wasn't the crazy early. Like, people, like my boss from the 76ers and Ken Sachin was like, 8 years ahead of me. And so that was, there's levels to it all. But I think, like, when I joined the 76ers, there was maybe 15 or 20-ish analysts in the entire league, and we had like 5 of them. And yeah, I think the way it's remarkable too, like how much it's changed now. Like every single team has at least some, especially now joining a baseball team, like they're so far ahead of all the other sports. You look at these top, like the most invested teams in baseball are like 35, 40 folks working in tech. It's like a Series B startup. Which makes sense because they're like $4 billion franchise. And so, like, yeah, they probably should. But no, I think it's really cool. I think, especially these days, like it's a marketplace of ideas, and, it's similar to industry. Like teams are investing to win. And I think not everyone thinks that this is the right lever to pull for them. And so, like, some teams aren't really pushing really hard on it. And perhaps that's like a good decision for them if that's, if they're not going to get the value out of it in terms of changing the decisions. But for a lot of teams, they're going very, very hard. And I think what's really cool is that the best teams, and like I'm kind of certainly the Dodgers now, I just joined them a few months ago, just seeing all this for the first time, I count them as like the very best. And the best teams make decisions using all the information that they can get. We think of things in terms of signal, and like, there's a ton of signal in an expert evaluator, like a scout watching a player live, and they can judge stuff like, form, body language, physical tool. And you wouldn't make a multi-million-dollar decision without knowing that kind of stuff. And so, of course, like there's a huge, huge role there. And at the same time, like, you can find a lot of signal by systematically evaluating a player's actual performance in terms of, on field or on court, and systematically comparing it to the thousands of players who came before them. And like, it'd be crazy not to do that again if you're making like huge decisions. And I think that, this stuff isn't controversial. Like teams have been looking at stats forever, but what's new and like what I really work on, and I think is kind of cool to see, is that like teams are really trying to optimize how much signal they can get out of the data. And I think, the best teams, like the two groups are super closely integrated. Analysts who know the scouts know the analysts, everybody's aware of each other's work and the value that they provide. And like, the questions that get generated are super good because it's like a scout saying, hey, like this player has these kinds of ratings on this scale. I have concerns about like, maybe in those sort of imply this kind of trajectory over time, but I have concerns about the repeatability of that motion because of some structural flaw that I saw when I was like watching them warm up. And like, you can't get that data they can't get that information out of the data. And so like when the best functioning franchises, it's a series of ideas generated off of an interplay between all sources of information, medical, and you talked about too, like performance science, sports science, training, player development, like really super well holistically integrated organizations. And yeah, I think that's new, but didn't used to always be the case. And there was much more siloing.
Yeah, for sure. You used a word a couple times in there. So for the non-data science in the audience, could you speak a little bit about that? I believe you were saying signal.
Yeah, it's like we judge sort of the amount of information contained in any sort of data set as like signal in terms of like how much it can predict something that we care about. So like if you're looking for signal in whether a college basketball player will become an NBA all-star, let's say, there's not a lot of signal in perhaps, I don't know, like how many points per game that they score. Like a lot of college players score a lot of points and they'll become NBA all-stars. But there is a lot of signal in how much that they can contribute to their team winning on the court. And it's harder to measure that, right? Like it doesn't show up in the traditional box score, but if you can find ways to ascertain that, it's a really high signal kind of piece of data.
Yeah, I have some friends and contacts that are basketball scouts, and they always would talk about how especially during COVID, it was really hard to do their job because a lot of their job is like the intel, talking to the assistant coaches about who these people are and such. So I think it's interesting. They're always like the quick say, hey, it can't all be data and it can't all be scouts. Some of them just say it can be all data. But so it seems like there's some pretty healthy, interesting friction in these organizations. And then to that point, I was reading a different Michael Lewis book recently, The Undoing Project, about the famous Israeli psychologist beasts. But they were in the introduction, they were talking about some of the mistakes the Rockets were making.
Yeah.
And a couple of them stood out. One was age of players. They were evaluating college players, and their model wasn't taking into account if they're older. It could have been a 24-year-old beating up on a bunch of 18-year-olds. Yep. The other thing they didn't take really into account, and they showed up in draft picks because their models weren't adjusted, but they also weren't taking into account strength of schedule. They were looking at this stuff and saying, hey, this guy's off the charts, but they weren't factoring in like performance in big games versus the cupcake games.
Yep.
And it's just fascinating. How do you look at, the differences between basketball and baseball? You mentioned it's way different and the teams are way bigger, but I'm curious how and why.
Yeah, I think the main differences stem from the rate of play to a degree. Like in baseball, it's a series of one-on-one interactions. It's the pitcher versus the batter. To a degree, the catcher versus the umpire in terms of like catcher framing. The fielder versus the ball, the base runner versus the catcher. And so you can really isolate who's doing what. On the basketball court, it's completely fluid. It's a real-time, continuous space kind of. Any player can do whatever they want within the rules, And so, you can have a point guard setting a pick for a center, and that occasionally happens. And it's much, much harder. And the player standing off in the corner way away from the ball can be providing a ton of value if he or she's a really good shooter. It's much harder to do credit assignment in basketball and to try to kind of break things up into units of analysis. And so I think that really kind of drives the differences. And I think explains to a degree why there's been so much more investment in baseball. It's easier to get early returns and just, keep grinding away at the wheel. It's a little more straightforward to put in place how you frame the models. In basketball, it's a little bit harder.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Judd, you spent 5 years or so in the startup world you mentioned the growth trajectories of these companies like Uber and Keep Truckin', which is now Motive. How have the experiences at these companies shaped your view of the future of business and the working world?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think, there's a couple things that people continue to sort of, one thing really people continue to underestimate that I think is really interesting, and I think you'll it's that the cost of compute just keeps on falling. And so things that were uneconomical 10 years ago are cheap now. And, the chipset in a security camera at the office has more power than my beefy home desktop did 15 years ago, but I was playing video games on. And it just keeps getting cheaper and cheaper to run code. And so as it does, things that used to be expensive become possible. And so you look at IoT and what ShipShape is doing, that couldn't have happened 15 years ago. And in 10 years, the realm of things that you guys are going to be able to do is going to just continue to mushroom out. But I think that's one where it's just, Uber was entirely enabled by the presence of a supercomputer in everybody's pocket. And, that kind of ability to just run code all the time, more and more everywhere, I think is a super interesting tailwind.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Even at ShipShip, you say 15, Alex, our CEO and founder, built the first prototype, I think, back in 15. And at that time, he would have had to manufacture all the hardware themselves. And, now you can use plugs like this, but there are millions of them out there, and they're only getting more frequently. So it's been interesting to be have a little bit of a front seat to a tailwind around IoT and IoT integrations.
Yeah.
which I think has been a really fascinating space.
You asked too about like future of work, and I think there's a really exciting new wave coming online right now. And there's been this just like kind of last 2-3 years, this massive wave of what they call like generative models in AI. And, you know, what this, I won't get into the technical side of it, but like for an example, I still spend a few hours every day writing and looking at code. And I have a text editor that has a plugin that's called Copilot. And it suggests like big chunks of code by guessing what I'm trying to do based on how I start writing. And like, it's completely eliminated most of the tedious aspects of writing code. And, you know, if I don't like what it says, I ignore it and, you know, write it myself. But half the time it has kind of guessed what I'm about to do and just does it for me. And I think about that for like, you know, I'm like legitimately 50% faster writing code. And that's like, you know, writing code is only a small chunk of like what I do, but to be 50% faster at it is like pretty amazing. And I think back on it of like, you know, I don't know, like designers or animators, folks who are doing that, like it's going to just draw in the rest of the scene based on how you started. And if you don't like it, you can make changes. And like when I was in high school, I worked for a local publishing company writing promotional articles for their website. It was like a small business doing self-publishing. So it's like, hey, do you want to publish a book about sports? Here's a bunch of ideas about sports. And like, here's how you go about doing it. If I had like, you know, Copilot for writing, my quota was 5 a day at that point. It would take a little over an hour to do each one. And I had to get done 5 each day. Like I could do 25 a day now. And they'd like higher quality. I think that like a super interesting trend with especially like knowledge work right now is that the dull things just keep getting automated and you're left with like more and more of just like the creative aspects of like, hey, like what is the message I'm actually trying to convey versus like, what is the, you know, right way to structure the sentence?
Yeah. I mean, 2-3 years has changed a lot, even the last 2 to 3 weeks with the open AI chatbot and the, I can't remember the name of the AI picture company that's blowing on
ability.
Yeah. It's really fascinating. You know, when you look at that, what inning do you think we're in?
First inning. Yeah.
Damn.
It's crazy. I mean, there's a lot of scary aspects to it too. We can't get into those, but yeah, like I think it's still very, because that's the thing is going back my previous point, like compute just keeps getting cheaper. You'll be able to stick a large language model in like smaller and smaller form factors. And yeah, it's going to get pretty wild, I think.
Yeah, it should be interesting. I mean, you know, we could have some confidence. Like, you know, one of the things I ask mentors and older friends about like, you know, did you guys think it was different now at different crossroads? And, you know, I remember the creator of Excel, was an accountant and was worried that the power of his tool would displace most of their industry because they were doing like long form computations and it ended up creating like the foundation for modern finance and so many other things. So I am hopeful that, you know, some of this stuff, while it can be a little scary, will also unlock possibilities for people that otherwise wouldn't be possible.
100%. I completely agree with that. It's just like, it tends to be that when we make better tools, it's not that we eliminate jobs. It's just like the people who are doing that work get to do way more stuff and often like more interesting stuff.
Yeah. So, speaking of being in the first inning and some of these trends you're watching, you're a member of an angel investor collective called IID, which stands for Invest in Data. Can you speak a little bit to what you guys are doing there?
Yeah. So the name is kind of also a double entendre because IID means independent and identically distributed. It's like a statistics term for an assumption to make. Yeah. We all wear our nerd hats pretty proudly on that group. It's a collection of data executives, and I think there's 35 of us in there right now. We, as you said, we make angel investments, usually around like $250K total across everybody. In promising data companies. And really the angle is that it's really hard to, as an investor, to get into like top deals. For like the most exciting companies, there's crazy competition amongst this huge like industry of VCs. What we're able to provide though is a pretty differentiated kind of background, which is you get access to 35 potential customers, not in the sense of like, pay to play, but like the super important aspect of a startup early on is like figuring out how to solve the right problems and build the right product. And so by working with us, you get access to like ask us questions, you join our Slack. And yeah, we very exclusively target companies that are building data products, for whom we would be the target customer. And yeah, it's a crazy ecosystem right now. There's amazing stuff going on, but just, every small chunk of like the data creation and modeling pipeline is getting turbocharged with new tools. And so like things that like basically everything that companies used to have to do by hand and like just things that were similar, but like, there just weren't products for, are now like getting solved with solutions that are made like super compelling and unlock a lot of exciting new stuff. Like the story I tell folks is when I joined Keep Truckin', it was like 5 years into the company's existence. And they'd only recently, in the last like 2 years before I joined, even just started a data team. And they started with a single data hire. And she was able to spin up a Snowflake data warehouse, on her own without having to kind of jump through a bunch of legal hoops and everything. It's just like self-serve sign up. And then connected it to a tool called Fivetran, which integrates with all of your B2B applications like Salesforce, Google Ads, like all of those systems. And then it just pipes all the data into Snowflake. She did that point, click. And like, all of a sudden she had a data warehouse that would have cost $150,000 to build 5 years earlier. And she had it in an hour. And so, she was able to go from like 0 to 60 in a day. Like her third day on the job, she like found some crazy insight that, turbocharged the sales process. And like, I think that it just continued to bloom like that to where now all these problems are just getting solved in the data world. I'm sure it's similar in other domains, but data is what I know. And so, yeah, we're really trying to like find those most promising companies, sit down with them, get to know them really well. We write, due diligence memos on them and take a call about whether to invest or not. And I think we've invested in a total of like 5 or 6 companies in the year and a half.
Yeah, that's awesome. And like your background, completely industry agnostic?
Yeah. And everybody, the requirement is you have to be like VP or above level with like purchasing power on the data stack.
Cool. Yeah, awesome.
Yeah, we focus on like all sorts of industries.
So, are there particular industries that you think are most interesting in regards to future applications of data?
I mean, it's a good question. I think a lot of them have already gotten, felt the main effects of data already. I think what's interesting now is that like, I've always been pretty intrigued by like the physical economy. So like at Uber, like it was actually like, cars and people on the street, like trying to make their workflow like easier and help people get around. At Motive, it was like the same thing, like help mostly like commercial vehicle drivers be safer, cheaper on the road, this kind of stuff. I think it's, I think that's really a super exciting frontier because it's just so huge. Like we all get around the Bay Area, everybody gets caught up in like software and, tech stuff. But like the truth of the matter is, I think tech is like 2% of the total workforce. Everybody's still doing like real, I'm to say this, like real jobs, like,
Yeah.
I think that there's a tremendous opportunity to make those, easier, safer, more efficient. And I think it's become more and more possible to do that.
Yeah, it's been cool to see technology go from like really abstract content terms to something that everyday people can benefit from. And I think that's an exciting prospect that should continue is, kind of redistributing some of this technology back to everyday people.
Yeah. I think that, this is going to get on my high horse though, is that like, technology owes it to people to like respect the people. Like, I think that there has been a lot of tech that has been kind of, what's the word, like users maybe? And like, you suck up a bunch of user data and you give them something with a bunch of ads and there's a lot of stuff to it that isn't great. And I think that hopefully over the next 10-ish years, we start to see more of a trend back towards like the companies really respect the person first and foremost, full stop. And you can make money without trying to like, like vacuum up everything that's possible to know about like John Sears.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, one of my friends and mentors is a professor at one of the major universities in the Southeast, and he's got his theory is that in a future state, all entrepreneurship will have some sort of social good component, and I think that could have some merit.
Yeah.
Hey, John, you've been really generous with your time today. Any reading materials or publications you recommend people to keep up on the future of data?
Yeah, future data.
Or just that you recommend in general, man.
No, yeah.
I know, or
data they're frankly like there needs to be better thought leadership. Maybe that means I should like go start like I'm not the best.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too, man. Be careful what you say.
I think that I haven't found anyone who I'm like, this is like, you know, full stop like the best people out there. Like I can tell you in basketball, definitely like Ben Falk, Kevin Pelton, Seth Partnow are amazing to read. If you're trying to learn about like basketball analytics, that's like the place to go. On the business side, like I'd be interested in your thoughts on this. I've been moving more away from like business book kind of stuff and more towards just like reading biographies. I found this podcast, Founders, from my old boss, Sam Hinkie, and like this dude, David Senra, just does deep dives all the time. Like he's a crazy maniac in terms of how much he reads, but like just historical figures by reading biographies. And it's gotten me way more interested in that. So like the best one, and I read it before I heard his podcast, I'll tell you that, but like he agrees that it's really good. It is A Man for All Markets by Ed Thorpe. This is the guy who figured out how to beat blackjack in casinos. He was a math professor, and he ended up making a fortune running what was effectively like the world's first quant hedge fund back in the early 70s. And, you know, it was just like, what's really cool is he had this insane zeal for solving problems, but like he didn't cut short the other aspects of his life. He was like he's still, obviously still alive, but like he's retired. But he was like a full human being. Like, you know, he like didn't cut corners with his family, didn't just like work like crazy, emphasized exercise and eating well, like just like and like, you know, a super stiff moral compass. And I just think that like, yeah, those kind of biographies just get me jazzed up, and like when you read them, you get to like spend 10 and 15 hours living through somebody else's eyes, and it opens up like new ways to live, and you know, just new outlooks on life. And like you come out of it just like, oh, like I could go out and like try to solve some crazy problem like he did. Yeah. The other thing I saw reading list wise, this is a classic, but I think one of the books that influenced me the most is Fooled by Randomness by Nassim Taleb. It's like 20 something years old, but it's one of my favorites. His thing is really just like humans don't understand risk. It's like, and what I think is really cool about it is he doesn't take it from the perspective that a lot of people like from my background do, which is like, oh, well, let's try to model it and like try to use historical data to understand it. He basically is like, absolutely not. Like you just can't systematically understand like all the possible downsides risks that you face. And so like, don't just throw up your hands, like try to figure out a way to like set up your systems or set up your life to be as robust to that crazy type of stuff as possible. He's the one who invented like the term black swan.
Yep.
And yeah, I think reading him is just like opens up a lot of questions for me, which is great.
Yeah, totally, man. Yeah, I share that. A lot of my reading recently has been at the cross section of biographies and psychology. On the biography side, Einstein by Walter Isaacson, very good. I'm reading River of Doubt by Teddy Roosevelt.
That's cool.
Which is fascinating. He's a crazy guy.
He's amazing.
But and the other one I really like, I've watched tons of David Rubenstein from Carlisle's interviews with like modern leaders, and I mean he's basically talked to everyone you could think of. And what I think so cool about it is it almost bridges the gap. Like some of these figures you almost think are like non-people, but it's cool to hear them think and speak, and you can just learn a lot. And to your point, it's like spending time with them, which I think is really powerful.
That's cool. I'll check them out.
Yeah, pretty cool. How can people keep up with John Sears?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I am John Sears. I'm on LinkedIn. I don't know what my username is, but you can find me special advisor at the LA Dodgers. Yeah, I have a blog, IamJohnSears.com, that has a single post ever, and I aspirationally would like to post more, but no, probably like Twitter is the best way to follow me.
Very good. Well, we'll make sure to have links to those handles and your very storied blog in the episode show notes. But really appreciate the time, John. Great catching up with you.
That was super fun. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, John. Yeah, cheers.